Hey everybody, welcome back, and today I am going to take you through my Canon EOS R5 settings. I took it out of the box, I set the whole camera up, and then I erased all the settings just so that I could go through it with you again. So, let's get it going. That's like where the graphics are gonna go when I have graphics. Here it is, the EOS R5. I've had this bad boy for about a week, and I've been playing with the settings. This video is all about how I set up the camera for me personally as I take it out of the box, and I'll go over some of the new settings in there that I thought were pretty cool. So before we get started, let me remind you about my podcast. It's called Photobomb, and it comes out every week. I co-host it with my good friend Booray Perry. I'll put a link to that and his excellent YouTube channel in the description of this video. Now, moving on, I'm gonna share with you what I'm doing with this as far as photography is concerned. The video stuff's gonna be in a totally different video because I'm still learning how to use it and switching to 4K and doing all that stuff. So I will share with you what I learned as I do it, how to process the files, how to shoot in C-Log, how to apply the lookup tables. All that stuff is coming, so stay tuned. But now, let's dig into this through the magic of Hollywood. You'll be able to follow along, bing, right there. So, here we go. Right away, you're gonna be into this camera menu tab that's gonna be most of the basic settings on the camera. Starting with image quality. Now, I typically will shoot with C-RAW over RAW because if you watch my EOS RP settings video, you'll see that it's essentially the same quality as RAW and you save about 30 to 40% on the file size depending on who you ask. I haven't seen much of a difference between the two at this point, so C-RAW is gonna be okay with me for now. If you don't have the software that can process these raw files yet, and at the time of this recording, Adobe Capture One, nobody really has a good engine for this just yet, JPEG is a good way to enjoy the camera, and it does make really beautiful JPEGs, so you could actually just start to shoot with and process those without too much problem. If you want to process the raw, you're going to need to probably use the new Adobe DNG converter for these files, or you can always download the free software, Canon's Digital Photo Professional, which I will link in the description. It's a little slower than some of those other engines, but it will give you a sense of how those files look raw, and you can process them, convert them to TIFFs or JPEGs, or do whatever you want with them. Now, I'm gonna keep this on C-RAW and take it off of JPEGs. Now, in dual pixel RAW, I'm not really gonna mess with that, but it does have some cool features that you can play with after the fact, like changing the lighting on your subject and all kinds of cool stuff. So you can look that up, play with that on your own time. I don't mess with it just yet. I'm just going through my basic setup stuff. Now, if you go into the cropping and aspect ratio, you can actually see a pretty cool feature, the 1.6 crop. If you're looking for smaller files, a little more manageable, or you're shooting tethered, or you're shooting something like large-scale corporate headshots, it's actually a pretty decent option, but it is gonna be cropped, and it's gonna leave you with about a 17 megapixel camera, which for some things is gonna be fine. So if you have a good use case for that, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about it. Okay, so my next setting for me is gonna be the anti-flicker shooting. I use it because my studio has overhead fluorescent lighting, and so when I'm shooting in the studio, I'm gonna enable that. That's gonna help me get consistent images. You may not want to enable it. It also disables other features in the camera if you use it. So that's just one thing that I use because of where I shoot, and I'm very often using mixed lighting in corporate offices that use a lot of overhead fluorescence. So that's a really helpful trick for me to be able to turn that on. Now with my color space, I usually stick to sRGB, and my picture style, although standard is out of the box, I like to shoot in neutral because I like to add a lot of my stuff in post. I like to leave the processing of the noise reduction and the sharpness and all that other stuff as much as possible for post-processing. I don't like to let the camera do the sharpening. I don't like to let the camera do all the noise reduction, just little bits here and there. So I try to keep those settings dialed back, much like clarity, which is a new one to me. Clarity in camera, I'm a little suspicious of, so for now I leave that at 0, but I will be playing with that moving forward and seeing what it does. Now there are a couple of cool features in the newer Canon cameras that you will see in the R5 and a couple more. You have multiple exposures. You can actually do multiple exposures in camera, which is cool. HDR mode is there. Focus bracketing in camera is very cool for some of those macro folks, and an intervalometer built in. Now, most of these have been in other cameras, but they're all put together in the EOS R5, which gives you some really cool options to be able to get creative in camera, and I think that's pretty awesome. Now, if you check out the shutter mode, you will see that you have a mechanical, you can do kind of a half and half hybrid electric first curtain shutter, and the electronic shutter, which gives you that full 20 shots a second continuous speed, and you can also shoot silently. I'm gonna leave it in that electronic first curtain. I did some shooting with it in the studio this week, and I found that it's actually really quiet in that mode, even compared to like my 5D Mark IV. So I'm pretty happy with how that sounds, and I'm just gonna leave it there. Now, for some reason, this should be turned off in my opinion by default, but it's on. The release shutter without card, I'm gonna go ahead and switch that off. That way I don't accidentally waste any frames not saving them to the card because I got excited and started shooting. So I just like to turn that off just so I don't make a mistake. I know in reality, you'll take a few images, look at the back of the camera and realize that you don't have a card in there, but I also like to save myself that embarrassment if I do that in front of a client in the camera room. One of the best things about this camera is the in-body image stabilization, and you can turn it on and you can turn it off, big surprise, but you can also change it so that it's either always on or only on when you're actually taking the picture. And one of those will save you a little bit of battery life, you guess which one, but I don't really need to turn it on only for the shot because I'm usually in my studio and another battery is only an arm's length away and it's no big deal for me to swap a battery in the middle of a session. Here's a cool feature that I like a lot. If you go into the image review section, you can actually make it so that the viewfinder does not use image review and the LCD does. So when I'm shooting in the studio and I have my eye up to the viewfinder, every time I take a picture, it doesn't pop and show me the image that I just took, and I like that. It's cool to be able to just pull back and look at the image if I want to see it there, and go back to the viewfinder and just be able to shoot. I like this feature a lot. Exposure simulation is something you're either going to love or you're going to hate. And now, for available light shooters, it is a godsend. You're going to waste a lot fewer frames. However, I shoot in the studio with strobes and I don't really need it, but I do often shoot inside in like an office or something and then take a few pictures outside, and I'm mixing natural light and I'm mixing strobes or sometimes just shooting available light. So for those times when I do need it, you can actually turn it on to during depth of field. This depth of field preview button on the front of the camera will actually also show you the exposure simulation if you want it to, and that is great. I'm really excited for that setting, and I'm just gonna put it on that right now. So one of the other things you can do to save battery life is to change your display performance. And so you can put it on power saving mode or you can put it on smooth. Since I'm mostly in the studio and I'm not really worried about running out of battery at an inopportune moment, I'm gonna keep it on smooth. I think it's gonna look a lot better. This is a beautiful viewfinder and it's a shame to turn it off its best looking feature. However, it can save you some battery life and that's there for you if you need it. Now I'm gonna show you how I set up my autofocus settings. There are like a gazillion ways to set this up, so I'll just keep it to the way I use it and why. In my autofocus method, I almost always have it on tracking. And so that's because I'm shooting individual subjects in the studio and I want it to grab their eye, and I'm photographing portraiture mainly. If you are photographing landscapes or products or something else, you're gonna wanna use a different method, but this is the one that I prefer. And I'm gonna make sure that my subject to detect is set to people because that's what I photograph, and the eye detection is enabled. Now, if you go to the touch and drag settings, you can also enable that so that you could drag your thumb around the LCD screen and select a point. This works in conjunction with the eye detect autofocus. So if it grabs the wrong subject or it's not grabbing the place you want or it can't quite find it, you can just, while viewing the image, drag your thumb on that LCD screen and put the point where you want it to be, and the tracking will pick up where you lift your thumb from and it goes from there. It's actually really cool. You can also use the joystick for that instead of this. You can use either of those things, but we have to go in the custom functions and enable the joystick to do that first, which we'll get to in a minute. Have you ever noticed the bright red light that can come out of the front of the camera when somebody's taking a picture? Well, that's the autofocus assist beam, and by default, that's on. Now, if you're photographing at a dark wedding reception and you need it to help you focus the camera, it can be really useful, but the modern R-series Canon cameras are really good at focusing in low light without it, and so I'm gonna turn it off. Not only because the camera doesn't need it for most of what I do, but because it is extremely distracting to see that hit somebody in the face or to have it hit you in the face when you're being focused on with this camera. So it's there if you need it, but I would recommend turning it off unless you're photographing a lot of low light stuff where you don't have to be inconspicuous. I can't quite figure out what that is, but I'm sure there's a case for that. So the R5 has an incredible servo mode in conjunction with that focus tracking that's gonna enable you to lock onto a subject and stay there. There are a few different modes that you can go to. I'm gonna leave mine on case 1 and not really mess with it. The tracking sensitivity and all that, everything works really well just as the default setup. So unless I find a specific reason, like I'm photographing cycle racing or something, or horses, I'm not gonna change this. It works really well for me for portraiture right out of the box. All these other autofocus settings work really well for me. You can dig into there and check out which ones you like to change. I'm not messing with any of those out of the camera. I'm just gonna concentrate for the sake of time on the things that I'm changing. I hope that makes sense. Moving on from the autofocus menu, going into this third tab, most of these settings will be really familiar if you're a Canon user. However, you will see some new stuff, this DP RAW processing, that you can change the lighting and change the focus on the background if you're shooting in dual pixel RAW. It's some really cool, advanced stuff, but I like to do most of my processing in post, so I'm not gonna mess with this too much, but it is there if you want it. However, if you go into the fourth part of the tab, you will be able to find something really useful. Down here will be the solution to one of the only things I don't love about this camera is where the rate button is. The rate button is in such an annoying place now because of the screen that is articulating and it flips out. You no longer have that list of buttons down the left side like you do on the 5 series cameras, so your info button and your rating are all in a new place. The rate button has ended up pretty much where the old menu button was. So when I go to hit the menu button, I keep jamming on that rate button by mistake. And since I don't use rate hardly ever in camera, I'll go ahead and disable it right here with this function, and you can just do that right there without a problem, and it's gonna save you a lot of aggravation. So now we're into the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth settings, and yes, I know that the original incarnations of the Canon Camera Connect app and their Bluetooth and their wireless wasn't exactly user-friendly and intuitive, but they've really improved it a lot in this version. The Bluetooth, especially, the image transfers lightning fast. It gives you the ability to have turn your phone into a wireless remote, a really simple, easy to use wireless remote. So for real estate photographers, time-lapse, astrophotographers, there's all kinds of cool uses for that. And so check that out. I'm gonna make a whole nother video on how to set that up, but here are all the settings, and it's super, super easy, and it will actually even walk you through with QR codes. And I had my iPad and my iPhone set up, transferring to this both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in just a couple of minutes without too many problems. And guess what? I complained, Canon listened. Well, it probably wasn't because of me, because whatever, but still, they did it. I'm really excited that now when you get a new camera from Canon, or at least the R5, the beep is off by default. The beep is off. I'm so excited not to have the beep that I don't have to go in there and change it. It's just such a feature. I can't even figure out a use case for the beep, but whatever, it doesn't matter. It's gone now, so yay! All right, moving on. All right, now still under the settings tab number 4, if you go down here, the shutter at shutdown is such a cool mode. It's absolutely wonderful. It's a brilliant innovation, and I can't figure out why you would shut it off except to clean the sensor, but I really dig it, and I'm glad it's there, and I'm really excited to have it and stuff, and whatever, shut up. This is the one button custom function thing that I found that I really like to change. If you go into customize buttons, and you're gonna make your way back here to the joystick, if you look by default, this is not going to be enabled to control your 1-point autofocus. And I don't know why it's not, but I highly recommend you just go in here and turn that on in both of these. And now when your eye autofocus tracking doesn't grab something or is grabbing the wrong thing, you can use the joystick to move that point to the right place and then keep firing away. Super easy. So that's pretty much it. Please like this video, hit subscribe, and hit the little bell to get notifications when I put out a new video. And don't forget to listen to the Photobomb podcast. There's a link to that in the description. Now, if you want another perspective on how to set up the camera from another great photographer, my friend John Gress also has the R5, and you can check out his YouTube channel and all the videos he's making, unboxing. He's got some great shooting videos with it you can check out. I'll put a link in the description there too. I'm gonna be making a video on how I set up my video settings, as well as how I do my favorites menus and set up my custom shooting modes. And I'm gonna show you image samples from what I've been working with this camera as I collect more and more images on it. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.